Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting myself and the panel to speak today on Africa's capital market investment climate. We do have a distinguished panel today, and we would be covering several dimensions, Pan-African capital market landscape, just to give you an idea of the context, and then specific issues around the investment climate in Africa, and then initiatives underway to build liquidity and drive increased trading volumes on the continent. With regards to context, the IMF global growth forecast is actually scheduled to be downgraded from 3.5% expected growth. And as you know, in July, it was 3.3% global growth now. And there's been a number of shocks, from commodity shocks to a slowdown in the Chinese economy, to an expectation that the US interest rates will be increased, and what that means for the rest of the world. So there's a good mix of activities that are going on around the globe that directly impact on Africa. Just to give you some stats with regards to the performance of African stock markets in 2015 year to date. The FTSE Asia Pan-African Index and the S&P All Africa Index are actually down 5.2% and 8.7% respectively year to date. This is an interesting statistic. 30 IPOs projected compared to 24 companies that raised 1.7 billion US in 2014. So we're actually expecting to do more IPOs this year. Already, 13 IPOs have been done. Nigeria Transcorp, JSC, Lodestone REIT, Novos Holdings, Virginia Active Morocco, Maroc, Egypt, Edita Foods Industry. Did I get that right? Emma. In Rwanda, Crystal Ventures, MTN, Ghana, Zambia Foods, ADB Limited. In Nairobi, the stock exchange itself demutualized and listed on the exchange itself. So there's some activity going on. In terms of markets that are performing, the BRVM composite index has returned about 14.8% year to date. That is an increase of about 1.8 billion US in market cap. Some of the larger markets like Nigeria, Egypt are struggling and haven't performed as well in terms of the indices. So with that said, let me introduce the panel today to give more context and address specific questions around what is going on in Africa today. We do have the CEO of the BRVM, Dr. Edo Amonuville, to my left. We also have the CEO of the Stock Exchange of Mauritius, Sunil Bedimadi. We also have Dr. Omran, the chairman of the Egyptian Stock Exchange, and Mr. David Grayson, who is the CEO of Albert Grayson, broker-dealers and investment bankers that perform a lot of activities on the entire continent. So let me direct the first question to Sunil, if you don't mind. So Mauritius, your government has been very active in driving its Africa strategy. How is your market performing, and what current and upcoming opportunities exist for investors in Mauritius?
Thank you, Oscar, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I just wanted to express my thanks to Africa Investor for inviting me to this panel. In fact, as you rightly pointed out, Oscar, I think Mauritius as a country has a very important strategy in positioning itself as a service platform for Africa. And I think the origin of this idea comes from the success that Mauritius has had in terms of positioning itself as a very attractive service platform for investments into India since the early 1990s. In fact, Mauritius signed a very attractive double taxation treaty with India, and this created the kind of environment for international investors that were looking at India as a very attractive investment destination to structure their vehicles, their investment vehicles from Mauritius for investments into India. And in fact, if you look at the statistics, over the last 20 years, Mauritius has been the main platform for structuring investment vehicles, private equity, investment funds, companies for investments into India, representing about 60% of both FDI or portfolio flows. So trying to use the same model now with the growing interest that we see for Africa in terms of investment opportunities across the continent in different parts and in different regions, Mauritius is also trying to extend that success to embrace the African investment opportunity. So what we see today, foreign investors coming from the Western world, US, Europe, and other countries of the European continent in general, not only UK, are growingly using Mauritius as a platform for investments into Africa. And what is also interesting as a move, we are seeing South-South international investment flows using Mauritius. Investors from India, for example, that are currently very active in the telecom sector and in other sectors in Africa are using Mauritius. China is growingly using Mauritius for its investment. So this in itself, I think from an exchange perspective, have created a totally new dynamism or totally new environment for us. So to answer your question, how has the market performed and what are the prospects? I think from a listing perspective, from an market activity perspective, from a trading perspective, 2015 has been very good. In fact, we've seen total volume and value traded increase substantially on our market. The number of new listings that we've had since the beginning of 2015 amounts to about 30. And the good story is that out of these 30, the big majority, that is more than 20, are not domestic companies. These are companies that are being structured in Mauritius for investments into Africa, into India, and other parts of the world, but that is using the stock exchange of Mauritius's multi-currency capital raising, listing, trading, and settlement platform to raise capital, list, trade, and settle from Mauritius. And the good story is that the money, some of them have done capital raising, the money is not necessarily being raised from Mauritius, they are being raised internationally because of this multi-currency listing, trading, and settlement platform. So in terms of growth development, the market has been extremely active. We've seen a number of new listings, and many of these companies have primarily listed on the stock exchange of Mauritius and dual listed on the JSE for the REN part of capital raising. So going forward, I think we will see the stock exchange of Mauritius leveraging on this internationalization of a platform more and more, so as to drive its growth not only from the internal economy, but also from this platform that we've created to service Africa and to service other emerging regions of the world. From a index perspective, of course, as Oscar has said, we have, I think, since the beginning of the year, also seen some selling off, and the main index, which is the all share index on our market, has dropped on a year-to-date basis by about, I think, 6.5%. So, and the reason is simple. It's because of what's going on internationally. Investors have been nervous, Growth rate in Mauritius has been around 3.5, and we are expecting either between 3.5 to 3.8% during this year, which by international standards is great, but by Mauritian standard is relatively an underperformance because we've had a history of growth of more than 5% for most of the last 20 odd years. So that's, in a nutshell, I think it's an exciting time because of market development, but of course we are a bit nervous about what is going on in the rest of the world. Thank you, Oscar.
Okay, thank you very much. I would move right on to Dr. Omran. How is Egypt faring with all the recent developments? Please share your insights on key facts that global investors should know and any initiatives underway to build liquidity and drive increased trading volume. I think it would be good to also put this in the context of the fact that, like Sunil was saying, there's people are being jittery around emerging and frontier markets right now.
Right. You're quite right. I mean, it's a tough time, Oscar. Very tough time. Market witnessed some sort of significant correction. Everybody is panic about the world economic growth, whether you mentioned that the world economy will grow by 3.3% instead of 3.5%, the slowdown in China, the expectation that the Fed will hike the interest rate might be sometime before the end of the year, and the impact of that on the capital flow, especially to emerging market, especially when we see the commodity prices are going down aggressively. So actually it's a very big and complicated issue, and nobody knows whether these things will be over shortly or it will take some times. And I'm not saying that we will see something like in 2008, but we might have some significant time before the market can perform in a positive way, actually. This from my point of view. But however, having said that, I mean, I always believe when the war starts, there is no discrimination between army and civilian, and this was happening in the financial markets. When you have a panic investors did not discriminate between good and bad market, between good and bad companies, between good and bad sectors. But when the dust is over and the war is over, then the market that has been treated badly, they will start to regain confidence again. And I guess many of the emerging markets, especially in the African continent, they have the fundamentals to show that they can provide something for investors. If I come back to Egypt and what's happening in the latest development, actually, we are no different than many of the emerging markets. The main index is suffering. I mean, I guess from the beginning of the year until now, I think we lost around 16%. But I do not want to be very harsh on the Egyptian exchange, because in the last 3 years, in 2012, we were growing by 48% our main index. In 2013, 24%, in 2014, 30%. So we're growing in the last 3 years in a very significant manner. This year we are down 18%. But what is the good news in that? The good news is if you look to the activity happening in the market, in the last 12 months, we were able to list around 22 companies. In 2015, we have 3 IPOs. I guess we are the most active market in the MENA region in terms of IPOs. I think the IPOs in Egypt, in the 2015, the market was able to raise around $1 billion, which is considered a very significant amount in the first half of 2015. We were expecting to continue having more IPO in the market before the year end, but again, I can see that 2-3 companies who were planning for IPO before the year end, they start to think about postponing that to see how the market will react, because nobody knows what the things will develop in the international financial market. What we are trying to do is to send a very confident message to the global investor in terms of the economic growth of the country. I mean, in the last 3-4 years, the Egyptian economy was growing by, on average, of 2 to 1.8%. Last year, we were growing by 4.3%, and according to our budget and our planning, that the year 2015-16, it is expected to have the GDP growth rate of 5%. Of course, the 5% is a target, but again, Whether or not we will be affected by the global slowdown in the economy, I mean, it's too early to tell, but of course it will have some sort of impact on the expectation of the growth rate of the economy. But again, fundamentally speaking, I can believe that the Egyptian economy will be able to attract more investment from outside. You know, there are very strong infrastructure projects happening in Egypt. I mean, last August, it was the Suez Canal corridor, the new canal in Egypt, which is very important for the world trade. Of course, the time was not very good, because if you are expecting to have a slowdown in the economy, you would have to expect that you will have a slowdown in international trade that will affect the performance of the Suez Canal project. But I mean, again, if you are looking to the medium to long term, you would believe that the country is heading to a huge infrastructure project. We are growing from a low level, so you will have a trend to have the 5 to and then to 6% next year. We are trying, the Egyptian exchange is to be a hub for financing not only the private sector, but also the government projects. And we believe that the stock exchange is not only for the private, but also for state-owned enterprise. And it has been a while that we did not see privatization in Egypt, but recently we were able to convince the government to capitalize on the stock market as a means of raising capital for SOEs. And the idea is not only to raise capital, but also to use the stock market as transparency slot, because we believe as the people working in the financial market that SOEs is not owned by the government. It's owned by the citizen at large, and the government is an agent to manage these companies. And I would like to see how these companies are performing, and the best way is to put them in the stock market. So one way is more transparency, is an access to finance, is for the citizen at large to monitor what's happening in this company. Recently we were able to list 2 state-owned companies from the petroleum sector, which is the first time to happen in 10 years since we stopped the privatization program. We are trying also, in 2015 also, we have the first exchange trading fund, ETF, to be listed and traded in the Egyptian exchange. And according to the regulatory authority, we did pass legislation to allow for listing for the revenue bonds. And this will be very important for the infrastructure project. Just to sum my intervention, very optimistic about the potential performance of the Egyptian economy and the way it will be able to attract foreign direct investment, whether this is through the portfolio flow or through the FDI. But again, we need to be a little bit realistic in our expectation, because in the next 2 to 3 months, I guess it's very important, not only for Egypt, but for the world economy, to know how the financial market will head and how the world economy will behave in terms of this kind of semi-crisis.
Let me stick with you for a second. So the picture you just painted, is that reflective of the whole of North Africa, or is it different? I just want...
For Africa at large?
No, North Africa, just North Africa. North Africa.
But I'm not sure, because if I look to the North Africa, I can see that Tunisia, for example, they start to see a significant slowdown in their economy. And you remember this area of what is called the Arab Spring. We have a problem in Libya next to Egypt. Tunisia was the starting point for Arab Spring. But you can see some of these countries, they start to see some sort of political stabilization. But again, when you have this stabilization in your political system and you start to grow in the economic front, then you are having the world economic problem. Whether or not we'll be affected, I guess we will, but to what extent, again, is too early to tell.
Thank you very much. So we've gone through the southern part of Africa to the north. Before we go to the west, let me bring an intermediary to raise some of the issues and some of the things you're finding there before going to the west. So David, you've had significant exposure through your clients to the continent and to the continent's markets. What are your views on where the opportunities are currently across Africa? And what can we as stock exchange leaders and regulators do to be more attractive to global institutional investors?
Sure. Thank you, Oscar. First of all, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a global stockbroker. Many of you know us particularly because we're involved in all of the frontier and emerging markets of the world. We were very early in the African markets. We got involved in South Africa in 1993. I was telling Ido that I visited Abidjan before the West Africa Stock Exchange opened. We were set up in Mauritius before they allowed foreign investing, and we were among the first foreign brokers to get involved in Egypt when they rewrote the capital markets laws in the early 1990s, and not only did privatizations, but created mutual funds which added a lot of liquidity to the market. In general, a couple of comments. First of all, Africa is not the United States of Africa. Each country has its own culture. It's a huge continent, just the same way each country in Europe has its own culture. I think what's different in Africa, and this, what I'm about to say, is not just having to do with Africa, but it's an emerging and frontier market issue, is that it's a cultural issue. Not every government, every country understands and uses the stock exchange as a very transparent, very legitimate way of raising capital. By raising capital, people can expand their businesses, expand their companies, take money off the table, bring in foreign investment, and use it to expand the economy in general. Egypt was among the first to do that in the early 1990s with a very big privatization program, which started out without a lot of interest. But two things about that made it unique. One was that they made the managers of the company shareholders, so that all of a sudden they became motivated to increase the company's share price and to meet with foreign investors. The second is they created mutual funds, so you had people who had absolutely no understanding of what the stock market did, other than some idea that it might be the casino. It gave them an opportunity to invest along a broad range of companies that they would not ordinarily have a chance to do that. Mauritius has been terrific about self-governance, and West Africa has largely been overlooked by a lot of investors because there has not been a lot of activity there. Nigeria has a lot of liquidity, but currently has various political and economic problems that are scaring investors away. But I think my message to the leaders of the stock exchanges are that you need to push your governments to start a series of privatizations. You need to educate the local companies about the advantages of raising capital on the stock exchanges. You need to educate the small investors about the advantages of using the stock exchange as a means of growing their savings, because the small investors add additional liquidity to the stock exchange. So these are all things that we see as ways of increasing liquidity and bringing foreign investors into the local markets. I should add, because people talk about lack of interest in emerging markets, Egypt did 3 IPOs, as Mohammed mentioned, but what he didn't say is that they were all oversubscribed almost 15 times. So there's still tremendous interest in getting involved in the emerging and frontier markets of Africa.
Okay, thank you, David. Let me go to West Africa. Edo, you recently hosted a roadshow in New York here. Tell us, what was the interest like, and what message do you have for investors that are looking to access your market and the West African markets?
Thank you, Oscar. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, the BRVM is the common stock exchange for the 8 francophone countries in West Africa. We start our operation in 1998, and actually we have 39 listed companies and 36 listed bonds in the market. Our market capitalization is about 14 billion US dollar this year, and our market is doing very, very well these last 3 years. This can be linked to the performance of our economies in West Africa. You know that we are actually one of the best region in terms of GDP growth in the continent and in the world, also because we have about 6% average growth these last 3 years, and our market is growing, as I say, very well. We have an increase of 40% in our indices in 2012, 20% in 2013, and 12% in 2014. And this year we have one of the best performance in Africa. Actually, we have about 17% growth in our market indexes from January. So I think that we have a market that is performing very, very well. We have 2 IPO last year. We are expecting 2 new IPO this year. And all these IPO, the 2 we have last year were oversubscribed 200 times. I can say that our market is, as I say, doing well, but we are moving now from the WAMU stock exchange to the ECOWAS stock exchange. Oscar was the first chairman of our council that are aiming to integrate our capital market. Doing so, if we achieve our goal of integrating our West African capital market, if we integrate the BRVM, the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the Ghanaian Stock Exchange, the Sierra Leone Stock Exchange, the Capo Verde Stock Exchange, and Liberian Stock Exchange, the West African Stock Exchange will be the second stock exchange on the continent after GSE, with 76 billion US dollar market cap and 273 listed companies. This can be a more large market for international investors and also for the regional investors. Coming back to your question, yes, we have done Wednesday a roadshow in New York to promote our market, to promote also our union in US. We think that is very, very important. This is one of the key major actions we are implementing to increase the liquidity and the volume in our market, and we have done it in 2014 in Paris. This year in April we were in London, and last Wednesday we were with Bloomberg here. We registered about 100 participants to the roadshow, with high representatives of our authorities, political authorities. We have had the Prime Minister of Benin, the Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire, and it was a very interesting opportunity for us to talk about our market, to talk about our region, and we hope that that can have a positive impact on our volume and our value traded in the market.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll ask 2 more questions, and then I would open it up for the audience to chime in. Sunil, I want to come back to you. When you view liquidity and your efforts to drive liquidity in the marketplace, do you differentiate between primary markets and secondary markets?
Yeah, I think it is very important, Oscar, that when you look at capital markets, to have a certain amount of depth both at the primary and at the secondary market level. Because what makes a market successful at the secondary level depends a lot on how easy it is for issuers and to raise capital at the primary market level. because this is what is going to drive in the future the secondary market activity on the exchanges. So it's a very fundamental, I think, for exchanges, but also for capital markets in general, to have a very broad and deep primary and secondary market. So in Mauritius, in fact, I refer to my answer to your initial question. We have been very successful over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of our positioning process of the exchange as an attractive capital raising, listing, trading platform for issuers. And what we've seen is that many of these issuers have turned to our market for listing their products, let's say in US dollar, because as a multi-currency platform, we can allow an issuer to list in US dollar, in euro, in GBP, in South African rand, but also in Mauritian rupee, raise capital in any of these 5 underlying currencies, list, trade, and settle in any of those 5 underlying currencies. So what we've seen is that many of these issuers, especially those that are targeting the international investors, they tend to raise the capital in US dollar. The money is not necessarily being raised in Mauritius. Part of that is raised in Mauritius, but you know, we're trying to become a sort of internationalized platform. So when you position yourself as an internationalized platform, the flows of capital need not necessarily be coming from the country itself. Part of it may be raised internally, but also part of it is being raised internationally, and that's what we've seen. In fact, since 2010, there's been nearly about $3 billion raised by all these international issuers that are using the Stock Exchange of Mauritius's platform. So to answer your question, I think it also relates to other capital markets or other exchanges in Africa. I think it is very important for us to internationalize our platform, in the sense that when there are IPOs, let's say in Egypt or in BRVM in Nigeria or in Mauritius, it is very important for us to be able to link our markets to the international capital flows, and that's where players like Oyabak Grayson, I think, are fundamental to this process. We need many more Oyabak Graysons to know about our market, understand the dynamism and the growth prospects of our issuers, of our countries, and try to get them to understand also that we do business in the way that can make them comfortable in terms of our compliance with international standards, be it on the trading and settlement side, that many of markets ensure strict delivery versus payment. We are in compliance with IOSCO principles, with the World Federation of Exchanges standards. So I think there's been a lot of positive moves in Africa, but the story has to be told. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think I congratulate Dr. Amenouve for what he is doing, because that's the only way for people in the developed world who are looking for attractive investment opportunities outside of the traditional markets to understand what is happening within the continent in different levels and in different countries. As David said, it's not the United States of Africa. Each country has its own specificity and its own dynamism, but it's important for us to get the story out there.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that if you look at the much bigger exchanges like the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and the Nigerian Stock Exchange, they're moving towards an internationalization, if you will. In Nigeria, for example, last year, we did an IPO that was a dual listing in Lagos and London to raise $500 million. Company Seplat, it's a $2 billion company. At the strike price, the demand was $750 million, and half of it was from Nigeria. Yeah. So you're seeing a lot more of that kind of activity going on, because it's important to drive, if people want to raise money, to actually be able to do it locally and internationally, and even locally, not just in your domestic economy, but across the continent. Yeah. David, let me come back to you. What regulatory improvements would you like to see to create more liquidity? And would you support an ASEA-led initiative to engage the private equity community to prepare a systematic pipeline and cohesive, coordinated ecosystem and environment for private equity exits as IPO candidates on the continent?
Good question, Oscar. Just before I answer that directly, following on what Sunil said, one of the things that the African markets can do individually is encourage your local issuers, company management, to travel to Europe, to travel to the United States to meet investors. Not only does it get them out to tell their story, it tells indirectly tells the country's story. And not enough African companies are visiting, except for maybe the largest, most liquid. Not enough of them get out here and visit investors because they don't necessarily understand the importance of doing that and how it adds liquidity not only to their company, but prepares investors for additional fundraisers and just brings more attention to the market. So I think that's very important. With regard to, I got off track, but with regard to private equity investors, there aren't that many private equity investors who exit their investments through IPOs. I wish there were more, because that would attract a lot of investor interest. I'm sure you wish there were more. But a lot of the exit scenarios are to a strategic investor rather than to the stock exchange. We work closely, actually, with the IFC, who invests along Pan-Africa and then does exit many of their investments through the exchange. But I wish there was more done through that either, and that's something that could be done individually or through something like the African Stock Exchange Association.
Thank you. Let me open it up to the audience. Comments, questions, by show of hand. Any takers? Okay. There's a lady here.
Thank you. My name is Joanna from Ashmore. Oscar, I know you haven't had a chance to give comments on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, but I was wondering if you had any comments on developments there, similar to other African countries. This year has been a challenging one for the market, but what do you see in the medium term in terms of the economic development, or potential economic development, and the impact on the stock exchange in general?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So to put things in context, as you know, the Nigerian Stock Exchange is the second largest on the continent, offering equities, fixed income, and exchange-traded funds. And yes, it's gone through a challenging period this year. The market is down about 13 to 14% this year. But if you look at its performance in the last 3 to 4 years, in fact 5 years, you will see that on average, it has returned about 17% annually. The challenge is driven primarily from shocks in commodities, crude oil, and therefore pressure on the currency. And so what you add to that the political uncertainty around the elections, which we've now successfully come out with a new government in place. A lot of the investors took away their monies and wanted to be on the sidelines to make sure that you have political stability and that whichever government comes in has a clear path with regards to economic policy. So the new government is in place now. The president has said that he would be announcing a cabinet this month, and hopefully the economic team will be in place and will begin to make very clear the economic direction that the country will be going in. And that is very critical because, as you know, we've had only monetary policy trying to address the currency shocks. For us at the exchange, we're very supportive of the effort of the government to plug leakages and to make sure that there is significant improvement in the security situation. We want to present ourselves as a platform that is supportive of the government and that will help to drive financing in building infrastructure, in making sure that the government policies are properly executed. The exchange is the largest platform for raising funds for the government. So we want to continue in that light. And in so doing, we're approaching the government to see if we can change the tax code to make it more attractive for companies to list and also more attractive for investors to participate in the marketplace. I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, here we go. Quick question just for all. What are your thoughts on the opportunity or efforts made to outreach to the diaspora to increase activity on the various African stock exchanges?
Okay, so can two diasporans, what?
Egyptians?
So diasporans, I think two of the panelists can represent the panel. Okay, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important issue to increase your communication, to be able to attract the money from the citizens that are living outside the continent itself. I guess there is a huge amount of money, and even if I talk about the Egyptian exchange, I understand that there are around 4 or 5 million Egyptians. They are living in the Gulf area or they are living in Europe and United States, and it is very important to have some sort of communication between the stock exchanges and the people are living outside. I guess this is could be done through the roadshow, through meetings like that. But again, you are quite right, because those people, many of them, they are wealthy investors, and there should be a platform, it should be a forum to done in an annual basis or semi-annual basis of how to communicate with these wealthy investors, because not only they will bring the money to the country, but also they can work as ambassador in the place that they are living to support and to encourage and convince others to invest in your country. So I'm not sure whether we are successful in doing that. We are trying, at least from the Egyptian Stock Exchange point of view, to be in touch with some of the people outside Egypt. But to be honest with you, I can tell that we are not as aggressive as we should do. And I'm not sure about the rest of African stock exchanges, but in reality, it could be a common issue. And you raised a very important question, actually, in which there is a huge amount of money sitting outside the African continent, and it could be, if it's well designed, is to attract some of this money to return back to the home destination.
Thank you. Second volunteer. Okay, Dr. Maniva.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think that is a very, very important issue for stock exchanges and for the BRVM. We are planning to have a roadshow next year in France, in Canada, and US to promote our market to the diaspora. And some of our state members are also working on the issuing of diaspora bonds next year, especially Cote d'Ivoire is working on that, and think that it can be a very important opportunity for the country to raise money from the diaspora to finance infrastructure in the country.
You want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to add an idea. I think it's very clear that there are millions of Africans living in different parts of the world, and the good story is that many of them have done extremely well and are high net worth people living in all these countries. So if the resources that they have could be mustered for investments back home, I think this would certainly create a tremendous potential for our markets. But the question is, how do you crystallize this potential into a real vehicle that would be investing into these markets? I don't know, maybe the leadership has to be taken by some of these high net worth individuals themselves, setting up a sort of diaspora hedge fund, let's say, for investments into Nigeria on the Nigerian stock market or in other markets in Africa, because I think definitely the potential is there. But it's a question of how do you structure it. I think by going on road shows and so on, yes, you may touch, 10, 15, 20, 100, but that's not sufficient. The question is, how do you reach out to, hundreds or thousands of them, and how do you create the vehicle that would, then allow them to express their interest for the country? I think this is where the challenge lies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, for us in Nigeria, the diasporans actually constitute some of the largest sources of flows into the country. And the government has recognized that and is doing a diaspora bond. On the stock market, 60% of market activity is foreign. And most of that foreign activity, other than the institutional money that comes in, is from diasporans as well. So it is a major source and a great question. Can we have one more question and then we'll wrap up?
Oscar, would you just excuse me before the question? Yesterday, this is the UN General Assembly, and there is a Sustainable Development Goals, and I think you would like to give a word about the role of stock exchanges as sustainable stock exchange initiative, especially 5 of the stock exchange in Africa were attending a meeting yesterday, and it's very important to show how the stock exchanges can support this the sustainable development goal through the initiative we have. I guess this is a very important
Yeah,
message.
thank you very much. The exchanges are supporting the United Nations via the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, which is a UN initiative that is supported by UNCTAD, UNEP, the Principles for Responsible Investment, and what's the last one? Global Compact.
Global Compact.
And you have major exchanges from around the world supporting this initiative. 5 exchanges from Africa were at the meeting yesterday to talk about ways in which the exchanges can galvanize their ecosystems to find sustainable ways of doing business and sustainable financing for these sustainable development goals. As you're aware, there are 17 sustainable development goals with about 169 targets. We've identified 4 that exchanges can play a critical role in, from equality in terms of gender equality, making sure that women are properly represented on the boards of directors of our listed companies, to appropriate sustainability reporting standards, to Umran, help me out here. I can't remember the other 2.
But I think out of the 16 goals and 169 targets, the stock exchange has like a 4 dimension. You mentioned the equality. There is something about dissemination of information. There is something about the sustainable growth for the economy. I mean, there are 5 targets in which the stock exchange can show models for the listed companies of how to put the issues related to environmental, social, and governance aspects in their way of doing business. This is something called the ESG reporting or ESG indices, environmental, social, and governance indicators. And I guess it's as you mentioned, is very important because stock exchanges is not a place for trading only. Most importantly, it's a place to support the ecosystem. It is access point to financing the growth. It is very important to add to the growth rate of the economy. Not only the growth rate, but what we are talking now about the sustainable kind of growth rate and the sustainable development in which we became part of the United Nations initiative.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we need to wrap up. It would be remiss of me as the president of ASIA if I did not make a plug for ASIA. ASIA is the Association of Securities Exchanges in Africa, 25 exchanges, doing great things to present exchanges as a platform to drive economic growth in Africa. One of the initiatives that we're currently working on is to link the sub-regional hubs together and present a much more deeper pool of liquidity for international investors. And our flagship conference, the ASEA conference, is in November 16th in South Africa, hosted by GSC. So if you're interested, please contact us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's thank the panel.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.